Well, why do we care about the global credit union community? If we think in terms of delivery channels, worldwide credit unions touch 1 billion lives. Now that's a story to tell. The global community brings us back to the roots of the credit union philosophy. Real people helping real people to have a better life. As we've seen from the global credit union thought leaders, cooperatives offer more than financial services. They offer safety, both physical and emotional security. The very core of a credit union is in its diverse field of membership and employee base. It's in our DNA. Credit union systems have revitalized economies. This is not limited to lesser developed countries. This is relative to our neighbors throughout the United States. Understand the impact and the potential to make a difference, as it is a lesson that can be learned through connecting the system. Ideas into action. 1. Learn more about the World Council of Credit Unions and the Worldwide Foundation. It's the way for your employees and your members to further understand the purpose of social connection and the unique position of credit unions. A key idea for recruiting and in retaining employees as well. Donate your time and your financial resources to allow your employees and members to be part of an exchange program. And most of all, use the power of a united voice, connecting 1 billion people worldwide cannot be ignored. Tap into this opportunity, as it is urgent to be relevant and bridge the divide within society. Experiencing another culture is the best way to learn and examine why we are all beautiful humans. CUNA Mutual Group has committed to match up to $1 million of donation from credit unions to the Worldwide Foundation. In 2021, as a board member, I know the metrics, I know the impact, and I've seen firsthand the difference that we can make to ourselves and to our credit unions by experiencing the impact of credit unions around the world. Why invest globally versus local only? Because our connections to the root and purpose of credit unions and our exposure to the importance they make will differentiate us and give a life-changing experience to your employees. In today's recruiting dilemma, why not give the gift that keeps on giving to your people, members, and to the world by seeing it side by side? Y'all know that the registration for the underground was free. Why not take a moment and make a donation to the Worldwide Foundation by going to woccuwoku.org. Click on the Worldwide Foundation and make a small donation or a large donation, but tell them the Underground sent you in the comments section, and we will demonstrate what we've learned today can pay it forward to people all over the world.
Wow! Credit unions are more than banks. They save people, help them recover from disasters, and achieve their dreams. I know I want to make a difference too. Maybe I can connect with kids in other places around the world. I bet there are other kids listening who will want to connect. Next, we have a special segment with Sue and a couple of underground partners, Gerry Singleton and Shazia Manus. They are so smart.
she's the CEO of Flume, and World Council helped them start that system. But she also brought up the fact that they decided their entire focus for 2020 was about keeping their employees, their members, and themselves safe. And so the initiatives went on to say, she said there is, when we talk about DEI initiatives, she used the term digital exclusion.
Wow.
And it really resonated with me because she articulated the fact that we're all connected digitally and we have cell phones and there's all of this movement in that direction. But in the process of that, the people that don't have access to a digital communication asset are in a position where they're being excluded without us even necessarily thinking mindfully about that. And so then I another big idea, right? Why, instead of, you remember the days when we would give bonuses to people or credit unions to sign up or for members to join the organization, why aren't we thinking about giving cell phones? Why aren't we collectively saying, what is the means of communication today? Cell phones, and we're looking at mobile apps, but we have to get to the root cause. And the root cause comes back to actually having access.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail in the head. I mean, every credit unions, obviously by a region, by geography, your context is obviously outside US, but even within US, there's large constituent of population still have the flip phones, so do not have that digital connectivity, so to speak. So if within the movement, we give incentive for opening accounts or certain type of, everybody runs promotions and campaign. So how can we maybe incenting different type of loyalty build strategy? Those are great ideas and concept. And sometimes that inspiration comes from outside. So I think these are very valid way of looking at the reward and the incentive, what we really want to drive towards, more connectivity and more engagement.
So not just the access of connectivity by having the device itself, but also having the networks and the ability to access them. I know that's something our industry as a whole is looking at, not only in the US, but it's also a global challenge, is access to broadband.
Yep.
Right? And we saw that during the pandemic for so many kids doing virtual school from home. Well, access to broadband for members and for our communities. I live in Montana, and there's some very rural areas here where there is no good connectivity or good access. And so I know as an industry, that's one of the things that we've been advocating for. So not only at the credit union level could we provide devices, but we could also at the industry level provide advocacy to kind of fight for additional infrastructure or things like that to support broadband across the country and obviously at a global level as well.
There's your integration, if you will, of human science with digital and the human behaviors, that it creates a sense of disconnection, which emotionally then has a toll. And I, like you, have been reading about what's going to happen with assimilation when we go back to work. And those of us that have gotten used to working from home, or children being at home, and the potential for what it's going to take to go back into the world. And so we had talked previously about kind of the hierarchy of humans. So how do you think this is the intersection of technology and the human science behind it? I'll start with Gerry and then I'll come to you, Shazia.
I think of how many people don't have that choice. Right? Going to your question, the vulnerable, right? The vulnerable, the underrepresented, the folks in areas and they don't have an ability to get out to have that connectivity and those kinds of things. And the control that the loss of control maybe that they feel. I heard a speaker last year who talked about the need to understand the visibility of our voice. Right. And I think, Shazia, you and Sue both have these great voices in the industry, and people listen, and we have a responsibility, right? We have a mandate, if you will, to use our voices. And then I think the opposite is also true. How many people in our society are invisible, right? And therefore their voices are not heard. And what is our responsibility as an industry, as a movement, right? What is our responsibility to make sure that those voices are heard, so that then when we talk about connectivity, we talk about access to financial services, that it's for everybody, including the vulnerable and for the voiceless. And how do we become that voice for them? That's kind of the thing that is going through my mind as we're talking.
Yeah, I think at a core level, as human being, that connectivity, the human connectivity is a core. It's a core. I mean, you know, there's been, I'm sure there's going to be more research. We'll find out the implications of the seclusion, as well as the whole pandemic related, how it kind of shaped the psychological or behavioral dynamics in children and so on and so forth. Yet to know, right, from that piece. But I said at an innate level, we want to be connected. And when that core need is somehow disrupted or compromised, it leads to a series of stress and trauma and all of those. I think we need to create a world where we can allow those accessibility to bring people together, and recognizing connectivity is a core human need that we have. And we cannot, if it is disrupted, it will have unintentional implication on the society.
If we think about the stress and anxiety and the worry and the things that people have gone through over the last 18 months or so, we talk a lot about ideas into action, right? That's a big part of what this conversation is all about, is ideas into action. I think of three things, just real quickly. They're very simple. Three things maybe for our industry, for credit unions to think about. One is a term called internal locus of control, right? So controlling those things that we can control. There's so much of the world right now that's out of our control. And when you think about finance, right, and people's finances, is there something credit unions can do to put more financial control in the hands of more people in ways that work for them, right? So I think of internal locus of control. What can credit unions do? What can our industry do? What can we do to help put more financial control in the hands of people? So that's one thing they can check the box. The second one is, I think of biofeedback, right? Our bodies they're talking to us all the time. And they're, over the last years, so I know you've talked about mental health and the toll of the pandemic on mental health. But what are our bodies telling us? What's self-awareness? And what can credit unions do, even around those, some things going through my mind around the biofeedback or self-awareness? What are some things that credit unions could do to help? We know there's a connection to finance, right? Financial well-being and physical health and mental health. Credit unions have a role to play in all of those things, obviously with our strength, superpowers around financial health. And then the third one is the one we've already talked about, and that's the importance of connection. What can credit unions do? What can we do to connect people, to bring them together in ways that, again, leverage our superpowers as an industry? So I think if we can find ways to reduce anxiety, reduce the stress, and finance is where we play. So how can we do it in the financial realm?
You made me think of the flight or fight.
Absolutely.
Right? And the idea that if I shut down and I'm afraid, I'm not going to learn. I'm not going to be open. And so all of these things play a role when it comes to the progression of society.
Yeah, I loved those three, very crisp, the control, the self-awareness, the biofeedback, and the connection. I think that it starts with the intention. We touched a little bit around, you can be intentional of having a holistic view, and versus or. That's an intentional choice, which you can control, because I can control how I'm going to allow my mind and body to be hopeful, to be helpful. On that front, with all of the social unrest and really bringing in the forefront some of the systemic racial injustice and equality we have, one of the places could be what I can control is taking a stance in the middle and say, I'm going to go for a position of love and equity. If we can all take a stance towards unity, towards love, and recognizing that healing is the path to kind of creating a new world, that there is a wound. So let's not be in denial, recognize the wound. And the only way to get out of the wound is to heal. And that is centered in that limbic brain when we were up in the cave days. And when you look somebody who looked different, the first thing I would have, where did you come from? Don't take my food, right? So that's essentially, and now obviously we live in a different world. We have different people, different culture, and yet our limbic brain is still catching on. What the brain is wired for is equity. Because again, that goes back to the cave days. I mean, we all hunted together. So if Gerry were given more food than I, Gerry's lack of survival depend on my own survival. So the brain is wired for that. So maybe that's one way of equity could be a focus, and diversity could be more of a measurement to really determine where we are in terms of creating an inclusive culture.
Absolutely. And Shazia, as you were talking, it made me think of the word belonging. When you think of equity, I was reading recently, there are 1 billion people in the world right now who are starving, and there are 1 billion people in the world who are obese. How do we, from an equity perspective, how do we start to balance that out? And I think of belonging versus othering. Right? I read a fascinating article about belonging versus othering. And the challenge was, and I think the challenge for us as an industry is, how do we bring structures to light in our credit union industry or credit union system to ensure they focus on belonging and not othering? And we should look at our products, our systems, our recruiting, right, for talent. If we start going down a leadership path, how we're developing leaders, how we're bringing leaders along, how do we do that to make sure that they're benefiting people? And if we're benefiting somebody, that means somebody might be burdened.
That requires us to have open minds, right?
Yeah.
And be exposed. And that whole idea of diversity of thought. There was an article actually today in the American Banker talking about human experience and how do we build human experience into our delivery channels when we've all become more digital. And we talked briefly about the idea of artificial intelligence is based upon experiences that people are programming in. So if they don't know, as Gerry said, they don't know what they don't know, it's very difficult for us to determine whether we are establishing equitable systems. And so the question becomes, how do we then in turn engage others that will know it at a different level or in a different way so that we build their experiences into it? And maybe that's what we're referring to here when we talk about equity of thought, bring people in to share those thoughts so that our systems become programmed differently. Now we look at our World Council of Credit Unions touching 1 billion lives worldwide. We have this system that we could be doing more with. And so what challenge would you put out to all of us, Shazia, about how we can use data to not only economically prosper, but also to really have an impact on society?
It is a global world connectivity, whether you may live in a region, but you rely on services. You may outsource your certain functions, certain capability, technology, contracting. It is a diverse global that your existence and your success depends on that. If you really want to digitally outreach and reach out, whether connect a particular constituent with access to services, financial awareness, disseminate tools or capability or resource, whatever that might be, you have to collect, datafy those inputs and outputs and then act on it.
I'll go back to a couple of the hammer points we talked about earlier, is that understanding the visibility of our voices. How do we as an industry use our voice and use it powerfully and to speak out and to speak up? I think that is really, really important. The second one that ties directly to it, Shaz, I think you mentioned this earlier, transformational versus transactional. Financial services is very transactional as the tasks, but our leaders, we need to be transformational leaders. We need to really focus on that. I think we need to use our voices and we need to be transformational leaders, and we need to know that others are watching us so that we're consistently walking the talk.
Do adults always make good role models?
Not always. Os adultos? No. The adults that just throw trash like on the ground. Meh. I don't care. Adults are very careless.
I feel like they need to be more considerate about our future.
Most of them don't listen a lot to the child. Go back to your room. Yeah, we'll try to get that sorted out, but they don't do anything about it.
Acho que eles me ouviriam mais se eu ficasse mais velha.
We are people. There's no difference between a child and an adult, just height.
I think grown-ups can learn many different things from kids, but something that I always say is that kids, they are pure. When they are born, they have already a connection to nature, and they lose this connection throughout lives.
I want my generation to enjoy the environment.
I want to make a change in the world. By being a superhero, that makes me feel stronger to stop bad people from doing bad stuff.
We kids, when we speak the truth. We speak from our hearts. We are not speaking because we want money or because we want something. We are speaking because we know that that's what it's being needed.
Uma pessoa que inspira, na minha opinião, é uma pessoa que faz o bem.
I feel like a role model is someone that you aspire to be, someone that you find truth in, someone that you agree with their opinions.
Do you consider yourself a role model?
Yes. Eu me acho. Eu me acho modelo. I don't know. For some people, I think I am a role model.
I mean, I do see myself as a role model.
I do consider myself a role model. Do you? Yes, I am a role model.
Os meus amigos acham que eu faço coisas boas.
Any age, really. And you'll still be a role model. A kid, yes, can change the future.
I really hope, I know that the youths will change the world and we will be able to tackle these issues and we will not have this crisis in the future.
Have a passion, something that you're strong about, and go for it.
Wow, I'm so excited to be live with the two of you and to further our discussion. I was thinking about the generations that have been represented, and I have a few notes here. As we were preparing for the underground, I wanted to reach out to the activists and ask them to engage with us directly. Before I did that, I realized that we have to be ready. We have to be honest. We have to have open minds because they'll see the truth about credit unions. So the kids are asking adults to be authentic and aspirational, giving them hope to be good role models. So Shazia, what truths did you learn from these discussions on a personal level? And then Gerry, I'll come back to you and come back to you at that point after Shazia shares.
Absolutely. It was such a wonderful to kind of observe and kind of contextualize. So two things. One was this notion of, as I reflect back, is being intentional and be very self-aware on listening. And when I mean by listening, not only listening, but also observing through my eyes and taking it in. And the second dimension of that is unpacking and contextualizing. What does it mean, what they're saying and what I'm observing them, how does it relate to their context? How does it relate to their environmental facet that they are at? And what does it mean for how do I react to that? The second piece would be all around this notion of hopefulness, abundance, because I can control that. And that means going back to this role model question, the way the kids responded, they consider themselves a role model. And I had to kind of sit on that a little bit myself, and I realized it's the beginner's mind. Because when you think about it, in a beginner's mind, there's so many possibilities, whereas in the expert's mind, there's few. And as we go through the adulthood, we do develop some preconceived beliefs and notions. So I have to empty my mind to really anchor on that beginner's mind, that childlike symptoms, and that innocence and that vulnerability.
Absolutely. Shazia, that is spot on. From the whole morning, all the sessions spoke to me in so many ways. And there's a lot to unpack. And personally, I'm going to be probably unpacking them for a while. My initial reactions, though, especially with the role model conversation with the kids, if I'm honest, I want to say I'm a role model. Mm-hmm. I want to make a difference, right? I want to use my voice in the credit union movement in ways that make a difference. But if I'm honest, if I'm really honest, I think if I asked the kids, they would say, you're looking at me, you're nodding your head and you're smiling, but you're not listening. You're not hearing what I'm saying and then doing something about it. And so I think that's the heart part for me today that I need to really kind of unpack and think about. When I think of being in the credit union movement, I asked myself a couple questions. The first one is, what inspired me to join this experiment, this thing called credit unions? What inspired me to do it? Now, if you're like me, most of us stumbled into it. We stumbled into credit unions, and then something got a hold of us and didn't let go, and now suddenly it's 30 years later. So what inspired you to get involved in credit unions? And then the second question is, what makes your heart sing? In other words, what got you here and what keeps you here? Because my life's motto is, I want to make a difference in the world. When I heard all these young activists talking, that's exactly what they want. They want to make a difference. And so I wonder out loud if we all can hone in on those things. Inspiration and passion. What makes our hearts sing? Are those the same things that make the young people's hearts sing? And are we communicating in a language that we can resonate with together so that we can together make a difference in the world? And it's going to take a whole lot of listening, truly listening and hearing in order to make that happen.
It's fascinating. So I want to do a follow-up with you. You know me. When we look to the future and we start to examine how do you engage youth activists, mm-hmm. right? And you think about the honesty and, as you said, that raw mm-hmm. way of speaking. Yeah. We're so packaged today.
Conditioned.
We have a tendency to want to keep the conversation within lanes. We want to have these boundaries. And I think early in the session, Maria talked about boundaries of the mind. And that resonated with me because it came back to the fact that, am I really open? Am I really willing to listen? Or am I going to fall back into patterns? And I believe that right now, with what's taking place in the world, we all have been so uncomfortable that being able to know comfort again in our own way mm-hmm. may stop us from that next level. So, couple thoughts?
Yeah, I think that goes back to this notion of abundance, hopefulness, and choosing words, because words becomes your thoughts and becomes your action and reality. So on that dimension, a world of a world of abundant possibilities, a world of belonging, though the way we more think about it, the way we emulate it, that's what resonates. So we have to go back, and that only comes by emptying some of those conditioning that we may have been accustomed to, part of our adulthood. We have to empty our mind to be able to make a little bit space to absorb newness, that rawness, that authenticity, that vulnerability, and just emulate that, because that's what people touches. And digital connectivity is all about authenticity, because it's not that face-to-face eye contact anymore. So you have to touch the heart, and you have to be sincere.
Absolutely. I love that concept of no boundaries as well. And I think of, too, in hearing the young people talk, that sense of awe and the sense of wonder. And how do we have that in our industry? I guess if we do a little self-reflection, Sue, I wonder, do we have that sense of awe and that sense of wonder? And if so, we should. And if so, how do we instill that out into the world? I think of magic, for example. I like to do magic tricks. It's kind of fun to do, and people love it and kids love it. When you're learning the magic trick, though, For you, the one who's learning the trick, sometimes the magic goes away. But what I've learned is by learning the magic myself, I can instill that sense of awe and wonder in so many others. How do we do that as an industry? And especially for the next generation, for young people, how do we instill that sense of awe and wonder?
So what we've said here is it starts with us.
Absolutely.
And us being open. And I put a note to myself that I know that I have to, in order to be trusted, I have to be cognizant, mindful, a part of it. When you work with different groups, you make sure you speak and you sit on the floor and you make sure that you're part of that, right? So we change our behavior to do that. So I put a second concept together and I thought to myself, so let's ask ourselves, back to your point, Gerry, let's ask ourselves, have we learned from an industry perspective to self-reflect upon open minds of leaders for the future members? And I want to take it one step forward. We're talking disruption. We're talking innovation labs. We're talking about getting this diverse group involved. Are we ready for that? Is the industry ready to really accept innovation that's outside of the lanes?
Ideas into action, so we have to stop talking and start doing more. I loved your notion of the sense of awe. I think the industry, when we started 100 years ago, there was a lot of curiosity, awe, hunger in the belly to go out and take risk and innovate and do all of that. As we have grown, as we have matured, success, I think study shows size, age, success all settles in that comfortness of inertia. We're kind of at that point right now today that we have to find that honest. And so 3 things I will bring up is, one is forget. So the things that it's intentional forgetting, again, going back to that intention, what worked may not work. What brought us here may not take us to the future. So let's try to be very intentional what things we need to forget. What things we might want to borrow, because there are strong roots. There are care of belonging, care, transparency, ethics, empathy. Those things are foundational. Let's carry on those, but maybe package it with different words and different orientation to resonate to the James of the world. And the third dimension is, what do we need to learn? So it's like this notion of unlearn, learn, and forget. We really have to, and that's where the honest, the vulnerability, the authenticity, that beginner's mind, that childlike energy has to come into play. I think we need to really reflect on those 3 dimensions, in what way we are doing those.
Excellent.
Totally agree, Shazia. And just piggybacking a little bit on the disruption conversation, credit unions are known for disruption. We've been disruptors for a really, really long time. When people were marginalized, when people were not able to access financial services, we got together and we formed credit unions, right? Yeah. So we are disruptors by our nature. And I wonder, now we're talking a lot about fintech and other disruptors in there as threats to our movement. And I wonder, what if we ask ourselves the hard question, what if we were the disruptors of ourselves? Yeah. What if we were the disruptors of ourselves? What actions would we take? What would we need to learn, to forget, to unlearn, and then take action and do? I've been thinking a lot about that lately. What would that look like if we were to disrupt ourselves? Interesting concept just to think about. So I have 2 things that I would add to the conversation. One is, we need to acknowledge that young people, we talk about young people as our future, and they are, absolutely. But young people are our right now. Yes. I don't know about you, but when I was 11, I was playing outside and gathering rocks, right? I was collecting rocks, right? Today, these young people have voices. They're using their voices, and they're not afraid to speak up, not only in their spheres or circles of influence, but around the world. We saw in the videos, we saw in the conversations, all those things. So we need, as an industry, to acknowledge these young people are our right now. Now, there was some research recently done with them. 7 seconds is what it takes to be interesting to a Gen Y. It takes 7 seconds to be interesting, not to gather their attention, but to be interesting to them. 7 seconds. Now, another study was done on goldfish. You can hold a goldfish attention for 8 seconds. So you can actually hold a goldfish's attention longer than a kid, right? So what are we going to do with our voices and our messaging to make sure we're interesting to young people? So that's the first one. Acknowledge first and foremost that concept, that we need to be interesting to them, and they are right now. And if we can turn their voices to use their voices for good, which they're doing, and do it for speaking out on behalf of credit unions because they're doing great work for people, that's awesome. The second one I think we need to acknowledge is that the credit union model works. We saw video after video, conversation after conversation, all across the world. The credit union model worked then, and it works now, and it's going to continue to work. I wonder, though, this is my reflection thinking, how are we articulating that model? Are we articulating in a way that young people, it resonates with young people, right? James, when he and Bob were talking early at the opening, James said, I think credit unions are cool because they care and they should work to remove discrimination. Right? That took less than 7 seconds to say that. They care and they work to remove discrimination. And you know what? That's what credit unions were about at the beginning. That's what we're about today, and that's what we'll continue to be about. And I wonder if we've overcomplicated it somehow with our messaging. And we're not always speaking the right language, even though we're on the same page. So what can we learn from that so that we as an industry, as a movement, can continue to be relevant to the next generation, which is our right now?
And that sense of urgency, people say to me, well, you showed kids, right? And they can't even open accounts yet. But as you indicated, it's now. They're working with their phones. They've got debit cards. Their 10-year-olds are doing this. And so the question becomes, how do we capture that 7 seconds? And that was fascinating for me. So what if the terms become a little bit more active, like financial justice, like financial democracy, using terms that are relative to the movement, to the social part of making the world better. I know that people will say it's our business to serve the community, and I know that we're in a position to where we stay in those lanes and our messaging stays in those lanes. But what hit us the most during the pandemic? Those commercials and branding where they reached out and they showed people playing horns and people getting together to celebrate life and their connection. And as I look to the future, that 7 seconds is going to be a guiding light for me, because literally I know we have to be ready.
We have work to do, certainly. I think that's one of my big takeaway, and that starts with that reflection awareness. At the same time, being almost approaching 50 years old now, but let's go back to the roots, ask the kids, and that's where not only listening and observing, engaging them, mobilizing them, and being part of defining what should be the language, what should be the narrative that they can relate to. Because some of the things that kids' videos were showing about, they care about environment, they care about the planet, they care about their future. How are we unpacking programs around that? They obviously showed they want to take charge, so that there's strong entrepreneurship. So they just don't want to be reactive and be told by businesses or adults. They want to build it themselves. Let's bring them into, and I heard a lot about discrimination, to your point, and that's all around, they care about belonging. They don't have categories. They don't have segmentations. They are looking for unity. So there's probably an opportunity for us just not only to listen, but mobilize and engage them in creating the narrative and the language that will appeal to that constituent.
And I want to just add a comment. In my comments, I made the note that we have to demonstrate the authenticity before we do the reach out. And once we open this door, there's the potential for people to examine it closer. And are we measuring our impact? Are we demonstrating that we can make a difference? Gerry?
Yep, I would say hope pops into my mind. As we heard all the speakers today, the activists, sure, also our credit union leaders globally, I have hope. I have a lot of hope. There's some amazing, talented leaders and individuals who are speaking out on behalf of credit unions because they're speaking out on behalf of people, right? And so I have hope. I have a lot of hope around that. I also am a little uncomfortable. Sue, when you were using words like financial justice and words like financial democracy and we've used words like fight, right? Those are powerful words in our industry, and they're not words necessarily that we're used to. Sometimes we try to, you mentioned swimming in our lanes or singing in our lanes. Sometimes we're so careful with our words. And I know as a person, I'm oftentimes so careful in my words because I don't want to mess it up and I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? And yet I'm uncomfortable with these words, and that is a good thing. In fact, that's a really good thing. I think we should not strive for consensus so much as we do, but really be uncomfortable with it because it's the right thing to do. Because frankly, that's what these young people not only ask of us, they require of us. They demand, maybe that's even stronger. They demand of us to do that. And we can do it. We absolutely can. But it's going to take a whole lot of vulnerability and a whole lot of uncomfortable. You know, I started squirming in my chair just talking about this because it makes me uncomfortable. And I think that's awesome.
I agree. And at the end of the one video, it says, "You have not seen anything yet," which to me was a call to action.
Absolutely.
A call for all of us to get a little uncomfortable and maybe take a look at our practices, as you said, in a new way. And look at it not from the standpoint that we haven't been successful, because we are, right? We saw that. The global connection reinforces that message for me, because 1 billion people that we touch worldwide, we have a huge delivery channel. If we put it in business terms, right? We have a way of getting the message out. And you mentioned social media. We know that we've seen the bank transfer day, right?
Yes.
We've seen social media have an impact. We just have to find the language to make that happen. And you talked about the idea of kind of the different sizes and assets of credit unions and their approach to their communities, right?
Yes.
And as that evolves, what does that look like? So any thoughts on that, Shazia, for our industry leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, we have a strong root. So let's expand the roots, just not go vertically, but go horizontally. And that will come from trying new things, building new programs, maybe going into the lanes that historically we haven't been. Some of the basic necessity type of support. I mean, you talked about care, safety. It's not emotional security, but also physical security, financial security. How do we manifest those through proof points of programs that reaches our boundaries around building community? But ultimately, it's the connection and amplification of the messaging and mobilizing. And that's the beauty of social media. We have seen that you can mobilize these movement just through engagement and the messaging, which is authentic and relevant. So I think that's one way of thinking about
Amplifying the voice. And that comes from the opportunity for us to be united.
Yes.
And our purpose is united. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to push this one or poke the bear, because we all believe in people helping people. We all believe in the core social mission that we're, as you said, stumbled into. But as we move forward, that being uncomfortable is a difficult thing, Gerry. So how does that affect our leadership?
Right. I think in some ways, we need to be even more collaborative. As an industry, we're very collaborative. And Shazia, you talked about that. We need to get out of our lanes sometimes. We need to push the envelope out of our lanes, because we know at the end of the day, the purpose is true and honorable. Collaboration is something we have to look at even more so. And again, that's going to make us uncomfortable, because sometimes it's easier just to do it, right? But I'm going to add multiplication to that. When we collaborate and truly collaborate, when we do that together, we can multiply the impact way greater than if any of us try to do it ourselves. We talked about getting, being, and staying proximate, right? How do we go right there and get proximate and stay proximate with those we're serving? You know, they say that those closest to the pain are those closest to the solution. And I go back to the young people and the voices and the role models. Are we asking them, right? Are we asking them and truly hearing what they say? Because they probably have some pretty good answers on what to do. I go back to James. James said, credit unions should offer programs for kids. James also said, credit unions should feed people, right? He talked a lot about that. And that's what our industry is known for. When we come together, nobody can stop us. And it's not just providing loans, right? It's feeding people, right? It's providing hope and it's providing dreams. We can do that. And it's going to take collaboration. It's going to take multiplication. And it's going to take proximity.
An amplification of voice, because
Absolutely.
we know story after story of how people are doing things. I want to share. I received a text from one of our clients a moment ago, and they said immediately, "This collision's fantastic. I think we need a youth council, and we need to listen, and we need to get started to find more James Rice models." Right? And so I thought to myself, yes, that's an idea into action. That's something that they will take away and go home to this is a board member. And the idea that they'll share that now, they'll share that concept. But are we, again, ready for when they come to the table? Our boards, I'll mention them for a moment, our boards need to be willing to have younger voices at the table. Our entire organization, we have young people within our organizations. And so are we using that, to be a conduit to hear and to listen?
Yes, simple task. We all have employees, and we have a lot of employees who have children between 11 and 16 and 18. Maybe we start there and look to kind of mobilize and listen and engage, and then put together some type of a framework and take it out to draw more, and then have them be the voice.
Yes.
And push the message to resonate. Again, going back to it, three of us can talk all day long, but in what way they will listen, I don't know, but they will listen to their own if they are, being the messenger of this beautiful industry mission and the work we do. So I think, but that is transformational thinking as opposed to transactional thinking, because obviously we know what business we are in. It's very transactional. We need to move beyond that.
Yep. I would say all those kids we heard on the video, the whole session, when they were using their voices, what if those voices were credit union voices that they were sharing? They were talking about, like you said, they're talking about the environment, they're talking about these other things. What if those voices were credit union voices? Yes. To the text you got, more James Rice's. Now, by the way, I'm going to look at the camera. CUNA Mutual's already got dibs on James, right? So I think he's already got a job offer in place. So we'll have to find somebody else.
That was so clever. And that was so, so nice. And it showed such authentic leadership on Bob's part. So you're right. And so from an ideas into action perspective, we're pushing forward on the idea of the next generation. And we want to change the frame of reference. We don't want to think of it as the generation that has already made the transition. They already have financial services. Why aren't we speaking to the 10, 11, to the 18 years old that we're now focusing on? And so we're passionate. And so the question comes down to, how do we take this to the world? And we're going to ask our audience, you need to have your takeaways and your ideas into action as you move into the future. I'm so excited that we got to spend some time together. They came to Las Vegas, and it is hot here. And yet we're willing to be part of some tough conversations to heat it up a little bit. And so thank you so much, Shazia, Gerry. I just appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.